Great. Hi and everyone, welcome to the first session of Python, and in this session we'll discuss about strings. Strings are used in Python to record text information. If you're coming from any other language, you would know what we are talking about. This is something that represents texts, but it's primarily used to record anything that is anything that's a noun. For example, a name or a country or a name of a person or a city and so on. So strings in Python are actually a sequence, which basically means Python keeps track of every element in a string. For example, Python understands the string hello to be a sequence of letters in a specific order. This means we will be able to use indexing to grab particular letters like the first letter or the second letter or the last letter and so on. So in this particular session we will be learning about creating strings, printing strings, differences in printing in Python 2 and how it has evolved to printing in 3, string indexing and slicing. We'll also look at string properties. We'll understand how string methods work, and finally we'll wrap up the section with print formatting. This doesn't sound a lot, it's very simple, and let's get started with understanding how Python or the idea of sequence is important one in Python, and we'll also definitely touch upon this chapter as we go. So without further ado, let's get started with some hands-on and look at how strings work. In this session we will be using Python 3. However, I will be happy to highlight certain things that are a part of Python 2 and how it has evolved to Python 3. So if you're coming from Python 2 or working on a project, an older version of Python, then you would definitely be able to relate to certain things. So first things first, since we have set up Python and installed Jupyter and we're all ready to go, I'm going to launch my Jupyter notebook. Note that I have navigated to my favorite directory. I'm just going to do a print working directory, and I have everything stashed in this location. So make sure you create your directory where you want to save all your work, and I also recommend you to follow me as I type. So I'm going to type Jupyter notebook, and this should start an instance of Jupyter server, and that's an IDE that runs along the Anaconda kernel shell for Python, and it opens up my favorite browser and opens up Jupyter notebook just like this. Now on this screen you have to click on the new button. We'll go over this sometime later in more detail, but for now all we need to understand is this is a great IDE for browser based application, and I will also be showing you how to execute on a Python terminal. But for now, let's use this. This is very comfortable. A lot of data scientists worldwide use and build their code on Jupyter. Its capabilities are infinitely out there, and you can be sure to read through some of the documentation. So let's come back to our topic on strings, and in this let me highlight how it works. So this is a string. Now let's see what happens if I run this. So I can run this by clicking this button, which is some sort of a forward button, or it's also like sort of a play. This button gives us all the selected cells down, and this will put us all the selected cells up, so you can move your cells around just like an Excel sheet. This gives you additional cells to type, or you can simply hit enter, and that gives as well. That increases the space in the cell. And this is the save button, cut and copy your contents and paste. So these are some of the basic features that are there. Be sure to be on code. If you're going to work on anything markdown, you can always use this. So let's say this is where we're going to use hello, and an alternative to clicking on this is also to press shift return on your keyboard. That runs or compiles and executes your code and prints an output. So it's taken into an input, compiled and printed out as an output. So that's also a string. Now this with double quotes is also a string. This also is a string, but this is also, for example, I can also put it in something like this. In Python 2, if you execute this without the print, without the colon, double quotes, like hello world, this would execute in Python 2, and that's the difference. In Python 3, this will return an error. It says missing parameters, because print, it becomes a function or a built-in method in Python 3. So if you're coming from Python 2, you can always use print as a function with parenthesis, which is a simpler solution than importing anything else to make it work, unless it's a large bunch of code. And then if you shift return, it will give you hello world, and so on. This is also a string. Now, why you may ask, why do we have a single string and why do we have a double string in places? The answer is that for situations like this. So, for example, if I use this in single quotes, I'm very happy. If I run this, this will return an error because I have used single quotes and only the first letter is considered as a string, and Python doesn't know what to do with the rest. So it's not able to understand the syntax. So we get a syntax error. How do we solve that? So if I have to write the same thing, I would write it this way. I'm very happy. So it allows us to use apostrophes in various formats, especially when you're typing something out there. So this is where strings are useful. So that's how we print a string. If you're coming from Python 2 and you have a lot of code and you have to write something, so you can do something like this: from __ future __. That's a double done D's. It's also called double underscore is also called done D. That means it helps us call upon certain library functions which are primitive or something else, that something where you are asking the shell that's running in your PC to talk to the shell that's running on the global CDN of Python, and to import a library that is from the version that is come after your current version. So it says print _ function. So this will make Python 3 available on your PC and then be able to work out. Since I'm using Python 3, I can suggest you to try this out if you are using a version of Python that is in version under anything before Python 3. And for everyone else who's using Python 3, you can ignore this and move on. So I'm going to just comment this out, and if I put a hash, it's a comment, just so you know. So that's about printing. We can also use a function called length to something like this to find out how many characteristics are in a string, or rather, to be precisely put, it will help us to know the length of a string. So for example, I will put something like this and say hello world. I want to know how many memory spaces it's taking, or in other words, what's the length of that string. So it's got 11 characters including the space in between. So we know that strings are a sequence, which means that Python can use indexes to call parts of that sequence. So for example, in this length of a string, it has 11 characters. That means 0 to 10 are being assigned to letters in this box. So let's say H has an index of 0, E has an index of 1, L has an index of 2, and so on. So that's how it started. So in Python, we use brackets, which are squared brackets like this. These are squared brackets that can be used to call its index. So we should also note that indexing starts at 0. So it doesn't start at 1. The first letter is always at 0, and the second letter is at 1. So let's create a new object and explore what I'm talking about, and I'll walk you through a few examples of string indexing. It's very important to understand indexing as a foundation to anything with strings, be it saving an object into database, or working on JSON, or scraping a web server, or running NLP on it. So it's the basics of how a string works. We are trying to build that right here. So let's give it a bit of more understanding with hands-on. So I'm going to take a variable s and use the assign operation. We'll look at operations later. So I'm going to give it a value, and let's call this hello world to keep it simple. Now when I run this, the string value is assigned to the variable s. So that means if I print s, it should print the value of whatever is stored in it. Or I can also do something like this. It also prints hello world. So now let's start indexing. Okay. So I'm going to take S, and I said we use square brackets, and then I want to call upon this letter H, for example. I'm going to say 0, and then I run it, or shift return, hit shift return, it returns H. So that's what it does. We can use this again to call the index of, let's say, 3, and this returns the L that's here. So you might be wondering whether this L or this L. Let's simplify it. So I'm going to call this, and then it's printing O. So it is 0, 1, 2, 3, and 4, and that the fifth letter of that word is 4. Now, what are the other things we can do? There is something called a string slicing. So we can use a colon to string slice it, along with grabs everything up to a designated point. For example, I'm going to say S, go and grab everything from the first letter and except the first letter. So that's what it slices, that particular first letter. Now in this case we don't use 0. In this case we are targeting the first letter. So that's string indexing for you, and there is no change to the original S. If you're wondering what's happening with the value that we assigned somewhere here, what has happened to that, if I print it, it's still the same. So we're just trying to do a lot of things that we can with it. So then let's look at some more examples real quick. So if I do a double colon, let's see what this does. So it is able to print something. So here we're telling Python to grab everything from 0 up to 3. So it doesn't include the third index. So you will see this a lot in Python, where statements and are used in a context of up to but not including. So we are telling you go print everything up to but not including that. So let me do this with a single quote and see what happens. So that's what it works. All right. So double indexing also works, and if I want to grab everything, just put a single colon and it prints everything there. And if I have to print the last letter, you might ask, how do I do that? Now, do I need to know the count of everything? I have a really long word. What do I do? So it's very simple. Again, you use slicing, but this time, you can use a -1. We're printing last letter, right? So this prints the last letter in your string, however long is it. The last one is always -1. So it also counts from, as it counts from 0, 1, 2, 3, it also counts from 0, -1, -2, -3. So let's see what -3 is when we call it's R, because it is -3 is here, -1, -2, -3. So that also works. Now, what happens if I use a colon with -1? It should grab everything but the last letter, right? So I'm going to use this, and I will say -1. So this should grab everything but that particular letter of that index. So that's how it works. So we can also use index to slice and grab elements of a sequence by a specified step size. So the default is 1. For instance, we like we did here in this example, we were able to get every third letter that is out there. So the same way, let's say I'm going to get everything but go in step size of 1. So, and the output is this. So it's step size of 1. So 1 would mean it would grab everything but go in step sizes of 1. But what if I have to grab everything and go in step sizes of 2? And that is grabbing every second letter. So 0, 1 is second, 0, 1 is L, 0, 1 is O, 0, 1 is W, and so on. So 0, 1, 0 and 1 are 2 counts. So it's going in step sizes of 2. Try out more examples like this and see what happens if you try and go with step sizes of 4, and maybe change your string and see. Try out some more examples on your own, let's try some more interesting things you can do with string. So how do I, there's something cool we can also do. For example, I'm going to do something like this, and with 2 quotes and use -1. Interesting. What does this do? So this actually reverses everything and prints a string backwards. That's what it does. So there's also something called string properties, which I'd like to bring upon. A very important factor is that immutability. So this means that once I have created a string, the elements within it cannot be changed or replaced unless I perform the same operation. What am I talking about? Yes, I'll explain this to you. So let's we've seen that S print hello world. Now let's try to add something. So I'm going to take the first letter like this, which is H, and I will try to assign it a value of another string called X. So according to Python, we cannot do this. We should be, because string is a immutable property. That means once it's created, the elements within it cannot be changed or replaced. What happens if I run this? It says exactly that. Another really cool thing about Python is that it clearly tells you what that error means. It's a type error. That means it's something to do with the type of data that we are trying to pass. It's a string, and it does not support this type of an assignment, and it is referring clearly that we cannot edit this. Now what happens is if I have to, what do I do in cases like this? So we can concatenate strings. What do I mean by concatenate is, let's go back. S, as we know, stands for hello world. Now if I can reassign this, or else I can concatenate this, something like this, and then I'm going to type something. So this prints something, it adds something after to that element, but it cannot change the existing element, but it can definitely modify something that is added. But do note that we haven't changed anything that is originally we assigned to S. Now if I have to change anything, I have to take the original variable and use an assignment operator, which is equal sign, and then take that with like this, and I can type let's print a value now is hello world concatenate strings. So that's how, or you can also do print S in Python 3, so you get to something like this. So this is how it works, and we can also use multiplication on this. So I'm going to say letter, create another variable called letter, and I will assign it a string value of one single alphabet called Z, and if I do letter multiplied by 10 times, it would return the 10 times. So this is how it works. Now let's also be mindful about something more about strings. Like every language has a method, Python also has a method. So objects in Python have certain built-in methods, and they are actually functions that are inside an object. We'll go about it, a lot of methods and functions in our functions and methods chapter that can perform these things can perform a lot of actions, and methods can perform certain commands or do certain things for us. So we can call methods with a period and then method name. Methods are in the form of something like this. So there is an object and there is a method, and then they take something called as parameters. So now these parameters are extra arguments that we can pass into the method. So don't worry if it doesn't make sense, if it does not make 100% sense right now. Later on we'll be creating our own objects and functions, and we will be able to build on or use some examples of built-in methods in strings. So let's look at some of them right now. All right, so let's go back to what we had originally. I'm going to comment this. This is just the syntax for your reference. I'm going to go back and say S is what we had, right? So let's see what this is. So I'm going to change it back to S is equal to hello world, and I'm going to print S now, so we got it back. So what if I had to change this to everything to, now notice everything is in lowercase. What if I wanted to change it to an upper case? So I just use a method called upper, and this would print everything to upper. And then there is something called lower. This would print everything to a lower method. So that's how it works. So there's also a method we call split, and this splits everything and converts it into a list. Let's look at what it does. Split, and now you can see it's split everything, and I can split it by the letter. put some parameters, right? So I'm going to say split it every time you find the word W in it, and it would print something like this. Oh, okay, W is not defined because I haven't given a code. So always be sure to pass on the code so you can see whenever there is a W, there is a comma associated. You can try a longer string and see what happens and how it separates. So there are a lot of methods that we have covered here, but I'll share the link to documentation, and we will be using a lot of this as we go. But for now, this is to get us started. Last one I would like to share with you is called print formatting. There is a method called format, and as an exercise or as a homework for you, I'd really want you to visit python.org and look at how the documentation is structured and understand it's very important that we know how to code, but it's also important to know where to look for in the documentation when we're really stuck. So if I want to look at Python strings, it's very simple. I can either just type string, or I can go to Python documentation and go to developer guide and understand how this works. But the job is to understand how formatting works. So I'll not tell that to you, but as an exercise, do work on what it is and how formatting works. But for now, let's take a pause. I will let you search on your own and understand and try out how format method can be implemented. And I'll pause a bit. All right, go ahead and search and try out. All right, so I hope you have tried it, and that was I hope that was easy. And let's try an example and see how this works. Okay, so I'm going to say write something like this. Okay, and let's try the format method. And I'll use the format method. So now the output is that the format method really formats it something like this and converts everything into a text format and puts it along within a single string. So we'll revisit this string formatting topic in later sections when we're building our projects. Great. All right. So I hope you got a good hands-on working on strings, and I hope you were able to follow me along with your coding yourself. And if you haven't understood anything, please feel free to ask. And this is just a basic introduction to strings. There's a whole lot more we will be looking at as we go. This is to get you started. I hope you enjoyed the first session. Next up, we have numbers coming up, and see you soon in the next class.